Welcome to Give God the Game Plan, where I share testimonies and stories to inspire, uplift, educate, and entertain. I've been a commercial photographer for over 40 years, so rather than force you to sit and look at me this entire time, I'll share some videos and photos I've done over the years. Enjoy. This chapter has two parts. It begins with what I experienced the moment my firstborn child, my son, was born. And it's followed by a testimony of how God used that story in the life of somebody a few years later. Today I'm going to take you along as I drove a U-Haul truck from Chama, New Mexico to Anchorage, Alaska. This is a story about what I experienced the instant my son was born, my firstborn child. A little bit of context is my wife got pregnant 1 month after we got married, and so a great deal of anxiety along the way as I was concerned about being able to provide. Wanted her to be a stay-at-home mom, and not having the two incomes for 2 or 3 years like we planned to save some money so she could stay at home caused concern for me. And then I'm an early riser, early to bed person, and so the day before he was born, I woke up, my normal time, 4:35 in the morning, and as I got into bed around 10, she announced she needed to go to the hospital. So fast forward through 14 hours of labor and me being up, all day and into the next one. At some point seemed like it would never happen, and I think the exhaustion just added to that. So when they said, well, we can see the baby's head and, this and that, it just seemed like, another thing that didn't really give me any encouragement that it was happening anytime soon. And then all of a sudden, poof, he just came out. And the way I describe it is, it was like somebody reached inside of me and yanked a cord attached to an emotion I didn't understand I had. And I just began bawling like a baby uncontrollably. As he came out, both the nurses simultaneously in stereo said, "Wow, what a beautiful baby." And they looked over at me, and I was sobbing. And they said, "Are you okay?" And I just kind of shook my head like, yeah, but I was, yeah. And I was kind of embarrassed, but again, I couldn't control it. Then I just experienced love 1,000 times greater than anything I'd ever experienced before. And I literally had the thought that if someone walked in this room right now and said, one of you has to die, I would just raise my hand and go, me, and then my next thought was, how could I possibly love something this much? I know it's a human being, but I don't even know it. It's like haven't even been looking at him for more than 10 seconds. And I just loved him more than I could possibly explain in words. The testimony part of this story involves the impact that sharing that story of my experience when my son was born with somebody else, the impact it had on their life. This is many years later. One of my best friends from church was getting married, and I was an usher in the ceremony. And as a result, for the rehearsal dinner, I was paired up with and met the woman I would be walking down the aisle with, who was the bride's sister. And so we had the rehearsal, and as we were eating dinner, I was talking to this woman I had just met. And the story about my son being born and what I experienced came up, and I shared that story with her. So fast forward about 2.5 years, and the couple that got married had a kid's birthday party or some kind of get-together That was the next time I saw the woman I met, the bride's sister, at the rehearsal dinner. It was the next time I saw her. We get there. I've got 2 kids at this point. Lots of people from church had kids, so the kids are playing and we're all fellowshipping. And at one point, this woman came up to me and asked if she could speak to me. And I said, sure. So it was a while later, as things were winding down, people were starting to leave. At one point, she just came up to me and said, hey, would this be a good time? And I said, sure. And so we sat down in a room where we could see into the family room where the kids were all playing. She had a child, and that was, I think, about 2.5 years old at the time. My kids, her kid, and others were playing in the rooms where we could sit and still keep an eye on them. She asked me if I remembered telling the story about my experience when my son was born. I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, yeah, I do remember having that conversation with you. Why? And she said, well, I had an appointment to get an abortion the Monday after I met you. And after hearing that story, I knew I couldn't go through with it. So I called and canceled the appointment. And she said, I just want to thank you for that. I now thank God every day I made the right decision. And she pointed at her son in the other room with tears in her eyes, and she said, that little boy wouldn't be here if you hadn't told me that story. What I really want you to know is that was the best decision I ever made. She said, you were absolutely right about the love you feel for your child. And she said, I am just so thankful. She said, I cannot imagine life without that little guy. I've never felt love like that before. There's nothing that compares to it. So I think that's an example of God using us. Generally, I think when he uses us, we're unaware of it. But I think by his grace, occasionally, he'll let us know, like this instance where he used me, and even though I had no idea at the time, it's pretty powerful how God works through our lives. You know the drill. Please like, share, and subscribe. My main goal is to encourage you. If I succeeded, then kindly encourage me by letting me know with a comment. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one.